I was actually thinking
That's why the euro got made in the first place. And they just have to remember why
Well, good evening.
that's why the euro was created.
I have a couple of commissions with which I would like to begin. The first is a message from Alexander Sasha Nekipelov, the Vice President of the Russian Academy of Sciences, whose son-in-law came by earlier this evening to wish us well and to express his regret that he and his colleagues were unable to join us, in part to honor Robert Skidelsky, but also because of their deep affection for our friend Mike Intriligator. I also have a commission from Sir Richard Jolly, who revealed to me one of the secrets of Robert Skidelsky's curriculum vitae, that he is in fact chairman of the governors of Brighton College, my old school as well as his. And Sir Richard goes on to say that Robert's brilliant biography of Keynes, this is a rather dubious proposition actually, he says, will be known to most in the AEA. If he'd said EPS, it would have been accurate enough. He goes on, but I am delighted that EPS draws attention to his intellectual leadership in other areas more directly linked to peace and security. May I call attention to his new book, written since 1900, A Success Story. This is a bold, outspoken, and wonderfully challenging history. And he followed with a rather lengthy quotation, which I won't read in full, but I did know a short piece of it about the start of the First World War, where Skidelsky wrote, had the British remained neutral, the Franco-German War might have been as short as 1870. Lenin ended his days as a disgruntled pamphleteer. Hitler eked out his living as a watercolorist. I want to say just a few words of my own about Robert, and particularly about the central part of his work that has drawn me to him over the years, which is, of course, his work on Keynes. I think it's fair to say that in the world of economics, there are reflexive anti-Keynesians, the Chicago School and the advisors to the present government of Germany come to mind. There are mechanical Keynesians. Robert is aware of less flattering ways of describing them than have been used in the past, who extract a policy or two by tweaking a neoclassical assumption. There are a few, and I would put myself in this category, who have read, the essential Keynes, a piece of the work, and have tried to capture the flair and the gestalt, and to communicate that to our students. And then there's Robert. Robert, who alone saw that if you wanted to rescue Keynes from the effacement, from the gradual fading away to which he might otherwise have been consigned, you had to bring him back in depth and in full. You had to give us the whole of Keynes in some way that we in our time could experience it. And so we are here today, I think, first of all, to salute Skidelsky, a scholar. But then there's a question of who can do such a thing. The Keynesian reach, or the reach of Keynes, is vast. And it can only be tackled with someone who has at least a somewhat similar range of intellect and interests, of senses and sensibilities, the capacity for abstraction and for worldliness. A rare combination of gifts. He must contemplate the particular in terms of the general, and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. He must study the present in light of the past for the purposes of the future. He must be purposeful and disinterested in a simultaneous mood. I trust you recognize this by now. As aloof and incorruptible as an artist, yet sometimes as near to earth as a politician. The members of the House of Lords actually qualify as politicians. Keynes, anyway, used those words to describe Marshall. Skidelsky, in his most recent book, on Keynes anyway, his third most recent book, uses them to describe Keynes, and I use them to describe Skidelsky. Finally, to take up a theme that I think is natural to all of us, but that I inherited from my father. And the theme of this organization, an economist must be prepared to focus on the big questions, to engage the perils with courage, and not to be content with narrow and sterile professional pursuits, petty hobby horses of the academic. She or he must turn toward danger. And this, in recent writing, is something Robert has done especially well, and particularly in the most recent months when dangers with which he is very familiar have surfaced before the world, and he has written for the public, for a large public, to confront and manage them. So, finally, Lord Robert Skidelsky, we salute you as one of us. And let me turn over the floor to Neva Goodwin.
When Jamie asked if I would make a few remarks, I was relieved that he said first they could and should be very brief, and second that I could confine my remarks to this wonderful book, How Much Is Enough, which I had just read, and I'm relieved that Jamie took on the very large subject, the very large work on Keynes, and I will just say a few things about this book. Part of my enjoyment in reading it is the fresh air and light that it lets in by knocking down a number of shibboleths that have impoverished public conversation on economic and social policy. It takes on the issue of paternalism, pointing out that governments willy-nilly do make ethical decisions, even while public discourse today pretends otherwise, cowed by the insistence of economists that only value-free statements can be taken seriously. Neutrality, the Skidelskys say, is a fiction. A neutral state simply hands power to the guardians of capital to manipulate public tastes in their own interests. The book also puts efficiency